between the public and private economies is the vast sums that the private sector spends in mergers and acquisitions, rationalisation and divestment. And unless the market system is completely mad, one can only conclude that there must be potential for massive efficiency gains to justify this ongoing search for different organisational boundaries, for alternative scale and scope. There is no equivalent search mechanism in the public service economy because we organised it as a producer monopoly. One of the few tools we have available is competition and contracting. It's one of the few tools we have to experiment with different borders. Now, of course, the situation isn't quite as stark as I've argued. Over the past 2 decades, reformers have been chipping away at the edges of the producer monopoly. They've made some progress. However, one country has persisted in its attempts to break down the old monopoly, to create a mixed economy in public services, and through successive changes of government, the United Kingdom. For the last 12 years, this process has been driven by a social democratic administration, a Labor government. And this has resulted in a somewhat different set of policies and institutions, a different narrative that might have developed under a government of the centre-right. It has probably contributed to the reforms becoming bipartisan and thus more sustainable. My impression is that the scale and scope of these reforms are little understood outside of the United Kingdom. External reporting here and elsewhere tends to focus overwhelmingly on the use of public-private partnerships in the procurement of physical infrastructure. And while that is probably an accurate reflection of the political debate, it fails to capture the breadth and the depth of the reforms to the public service economy under New Labor. Reform has been piecemeal. Progress has been inconsistent. When they have encountered public concern or entrenched opposition from producer interests, Blair and Brown slowed the reforms. However, they kept coming back, driving in greater choice and competition, breaking up the industrial monopolies on the supply side, introducing greater devolution and thus diversity into the demand side. So that as Britain prepares for a closely fought election over the next 12 months, both sides are talking about radical new models for driving choice and personalisation into public services. Both sides are exploring contracting for outcomes rather than just inputs or outputs. And policymakers are at ease in discussing the introduction of market instruments in the reform of public services. The liberalisation of the public service economy, however, remains a work in progress. But because of reforms now taking place in the United Kingdom, we can begin to dimly discern what a mature public service market might look like. Let me talk just a little about that. We can expect that in such an economy there will be a variety of different market models used in different sectors. In some cases, the provision of services will be left to private and third sector providers operating within a framework of government regulation. Residential care for the aged is one such example. In other cases, government will be able to provide service users with a great deal of choice amongst alternative providers addressing questions of equity and affordability through direct funding of individuals or families. We're speaking here about vouchers, although politicians will be extremely reluctant to use that word. The UK has a long way before it's caught up with Australia's partial voucher system in secondary education and primary health care, but it seems reasonable to expect that in both countries choice will be extended to a much wider range of public services, and notably in human services. Other markets will be tightly controlled by government through the use of competitive tendering and contracting, competition for the market rather than competition in the market, as someone expressed it. But even there, we'll see a diversity of models, many-to-many markets, such as exists in local government, where a multiplicity of buyers, customers buy services from a multiplicity of suppliers, and one-to-many markets, such as exists in the custodial sector, where a single public sector organisation buys from multiple providers. In my view, the mature public service market will be a mixed economy, populated by public, private and voluntary sector providers. In the UK, high-performing NHS hospitals have been established as foundation trusts with greater commercial freedom. And there's already a variety of social enterprises competing in the marketplace that began life as direct service organisations in a local authority. Perhaps the most striking example is Greenwich Leisure Limited, a not-for-profit social enterprise started in local government that manages 65 public leisure centres within the M25. Government has invested significant resources into building the management capability of third sector organisations, and it's passed legislation making it easier for them to create commercial structures. Over time, government has helped to develop additional capacity in the private sector, encouraging new entrants from overseas and from related sectors, and facilitating joint ventures between small specialist providers and large corporations with a greater capacity for managing risk. At the same time, government is engaged in an educative process, encouraging private firms to develop the public service ethos that is so vital in the delivery of core public services. In a mature public service market, we'll see the emergence of hybrids, public-private, private-voluntary, public-private voluntary, joint ventures between these organisations. And indeed in the UK we're already seeing these. Working Links, one of the leading providers in the new welfare to work market in the UK, is a joint venture between the shareholder executive of the UK government, an employment services firm, a BPO provider, and a third sector organisation, Mission Australia. Private and voluntary providers are working closely together in delivering prison and probation services. And perhaps the most striking example in recent months is a public-private joint venture, a limited liability partnership created by Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, one of Britain's leading public hospital trusts, for the management of its pathology services. Months after its creation, GSTS Pathology has already leveraged Guy's and St Thomas's powerful brand to deliver services to other hospital trusts throughout Britain. This isn't privatisation, it isn't mere outsourcing, it's not an asset-driven PPP. This is something quite new, a commercial arrangement created bottom-up by a world-class public organisation to export its service offering into the wider market. Intelligent exploration of efficient borders. Of course, the creation of a mixed economy where public, private and voluntary providers compete and collaborate means that policymakers and regulators must allow public enterprises appropriate commercial freedom whilst also ensuring that there is competitive neutrality between providers from different sectors. Raises some interesting policy challenges. It also follows that with the maturation of the public service economy, we will see the emergence of a diversity of business models. At present, the debate's focused on two dominant models, simple outsourcing and the much more complex PPPs. However, as one looks at the more sophisticated markets around the world, one sees quite different arrangements beginning to emerge. In Ontario, Canada, the provincial government issued a 10-year franchise for the management of its driver examination service, securitising the franchise fee and collecting the lot up front, resulting in something that sort of looks like a non-asset-based PPP. At Tama Hospital in Japan, an innovative PPP had the supplier working alongside hospital management to re-engineer clinical and non-clinical functions whilst managing existing suppliers and the construction of new facilities. An integrator model similar to Tama has been used with the Atomic Weapons Establishment in the UK, where a consortium of private corporations works in close collaboration with the customer to manage scientists, contractors and the procurement of PPPs under flexible and highly complex governance arrangements. This kind of experimentation and diversity is exactly what you would expect as the market matures and firms start to search for efficient borders. And looked at in that way, we shouldn't be surprised that PPP models have adapted in light of changing economic circumstances. This sort of ebb and flow as organisations adapt to surrounding conditions is what you would expect to see in a maturing public service market. One of the things that I find most interesting about organisations such as Greenwich Leisure and GSTS Pathology is that government seems to have found a way of scaling up best practice so that it's capable of expanding across organisational and jurisdictional boundaries. In the mature public service market, we should expect to see a great deal more dissemination of excellence from one provider to another, from one government to another, from one service sector to another, from one country to another. It will happen through the creation of social enterprises, through the establishment of joint ventures, through the privatisation and spinning off of pockets of best practice, through the